Hello, my name is Karan Madhok, class of 2003, graduate of Woodstock School. I'm a journalist, a writer, and soon to be novelist. And my talk today is for writers and artists too, who hope to turn that powerful weapon of memory into prose or into other forms of creative output. So, Woodstock School has helped instill me with much of the creativity which I feel has been beneficial in my life as a writer. Since the theme of these TEDx sessions is rekindling connections, I found no better subject than that of memory, of nostalgia, and of those past experiences in boarding days, in school days. So here's a start that may shock some people. Some of my worst memories were in Missouri. So not in Woodstock School itself, thankfully, which was clearly the best hour of my life. But I'm talking about my memories of school where I spent just 5 months of my life before joining Woodstock. I was 10 years old when my parents left me in a hostel in Missouri. My parents are from Varanasi, which was about a 16-hour train journey back in those days. I was only in grade 5. I'd never been away from home before this. I don't need to say anymore, do I? If you had boarding school experience, especially like I did at such a young age, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. From the first time I waved goodbye to my mother outside the doors of our hostel hall, I was in a living nightmare. I cried almost every night for the first few weeks. Even my letters were stained with tears. Yes, those were the days of actual letter writing, actual pen on actual paper in actual envelopes that featured the saliva of my actually licked stamps. That's how old I am. I have a lot of memories from the next few months. Some are mundane, like the Sunday mornings when we all gathered for the only TV time of the week and we would watch reruns of the Mahabharata on Doordarshan. There are memories of how the wardens would slap my palms with a wooden ruler before school in the morning. If I didn't have my nails neatly clipped or my hair neatly combed. There are some memories which are life defining, even life changing, like the time I ran away from the school for about half a day, or the time my elder brother rescued another schoolmate from drowning during a winter trip to Goa. Now, of course, we all know the memory can be a funny thing. I would say this is a shared phenomena between most of us. We are often likely to remember specifics of events from our childhood, even more than similar specifics from a month ago. In some cases, adults, I think, face a sort of disassociation where we may block out childhood memories because of trauma. But in many other cases, looking back at our formative years, these childhood years, we remember everything as being new and exciting. Everything was being done for the very first time. Every experience felt like it would change us forever. And often it did. Many of us, for example, remember the birthday parties of our childhood cousins and friends, decades after they happened. We remember the address, we remember what the home looked like, the outfits, the return gifts we got at these parties, stuff like that. Uh, in my experience, some of the best storytelling, whether it's oral storytelling, written or told in a multimedia kind of format, they all hark back to these memories of childhood. For so many writers and creative people, the ability to harness that purity or innocence of those early experiences goes a long way in defining the work we eventually produce as adults. Sometimes these stories are factual, as nonfiction. So, as in, the storyteller will tell the audience that whatever happened happened to them, that the storyteller themselves were witness to this highly vivid scene from the past. Perhaps they either actively participated or were just alive for this occasion. You could recall perhaps being a witness to something celebratory, like the time a big movie star or athlete visited your school. Or perhaps it could be something traumatic, like witnessing a devastating earthquake or a fire. The occasion could be momentous. I still remember being on the train, on an overnight train. I think we are going either from Varanasi to Dehradun or the other way back. And early in the morning, from off the platform, my father picked up the newspaper. This was in the early 90s, and the headline was about the assassination of Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. So, occasions like that really stick with your mind. It could be a tiny occasion. Or one of the occasions, one of the memories that sticks with me from Woodstock days is a specific taste. It's a taste of the masala resin that collects at the bottom of a raw YY packet that you're sharing with your friends. That's a specific memory. uh, but these memories could also be repackaged and retold as a form of fiction. This is really common with novelists or filmmakers, especially those who produce work that features coming of age stories. There are so many examples like these in pop culture, including novels like Catcher in the Rye or comedy Hollywood films like Superbad or Booksmart. The audience knows that these stories are fiction, but there are certain specifics in the story that makes it clear that the storyteller has actually lived in the place described. that they have had the type of friends that we see on the screen, that they felt those very particular emotions themselves. So remember that example I gave of that famous athlete maybe visiting your school? You could always repackage that as a form of fiction when you actually get a chance to interact with this athlete and they turn out heartbreakingly to be drastically different from what you expected them to be. What's beautiful about fiction is that we're able to find a type of universality in something specific. For me, it is finding that specificity that is the not so secret weapon, which can turn a decent story into a really memorable one. Take, for example, the emotion of apathy. It's one thing to say that a character was so apathetic and cold hearted that he didn't even feel sorrow for the death of his mother. Okay, that's a pretty strong statement, and it will perhaps shock the reader. But what if you actually wrote about all the other things that the character did apart from grieving for his mother? So, this is basically the opening of one of my favorite novels, Albert Camus' L'Étranger, or The Outsider. In this novel, the main character, Marceau, doesn't remember if his mother died today or yesterday. Marceau finds himself sleeping lethargically on the bus back to his hometown for his own mother's funeral. He focuses more on how talkative the caretaker that he meets here is. And when he returns home the next day, he simply goes for a pleasurable swim. The specifics of what he actually did is one of the well known aphorisms of fiction and creative nonfiction, which is that the author must show and not tell, put scene instead of exposition. Where instead of being told that Marceau was heartless about his mother's death, we're actually told about all the things that he does instead. And this heartlessness is something that we, the readers, can then decide for ourselves. This principle applies to memory in a very powerful way. I could just tell you guys directly how much I hated that Missouri boarding school before I joined Woodstock. I could say just say it out loud how homesick I was. But how boring is that story? You know, what type of weirdo isn't a little homesick during their first time at a boarding school, right? But what would make my story unique is the specific homesickness that is unique to me. So I already told you about the letters that was stained with my tears. I had other complaints too, like not being allowed to choose my own clothes to wear after school every evening. And so I would miss how my mother then involved me in, picking my clothes, picking my outfit. At this school, I remember waiting outside the phone booth for my parents to call once a week. But instead of the small talk that they would initiate, I would simply break down crying into the phone, and then neither of us could hear each other. These specifics eventually ended up playing a major part in my creative work. In a nonfiction essay I published last year, I recall the day that I escaped from this school and tried to go all the way home from Missouri to Varanasi all alone. So remember, I was just 10 years old. Okay, so that's a pretty interesting premise, isn't it? But what makes the story truly stand out is, again, the specifics of memory that I added. I remember that I had exactly 20 rupees in my pocket to take me somehow 1100 kilometers south of the country. I remember the multicolored shirt I wore, bought from the Tibetan market near the Julagar. I remember that after scaling the school's walls and making my way all the way down to Library Bazaar, I finally found some sense and decided to walk back to the dorms. But I do remember exactly I spent that 20 rupees on. A packet of Lay's chips and 10 Hajmola candies, most of which were imli flavored. And yes, when I returned back to school that evening, I remembered how many lashes the teacher gave me on my butt. 10, same as my age. My memories of the school that shall not be named later helped me write fiction too. One such example was a short story that was published in an American journal a few years ago about friendships among young adolescents in boarding school. And even though you might have stories that don't fit the exact setting of boarding school, there have been times that in my work I borrowed the specificity of emotions from those days and placed them into entirely different situations. After all, homesickness isn't just a boarding school problem. Adults can be homesick when they migrate or live in or work in different cities. And you don't need to be a 10-year-old in a hostel to feel that detachment from one's parents. Whether that detachment is physical or it could be an emotional detachment too. For writers, one of the best weapons in our arsenal is our memory, and especially memories of those energetic days of childhood. Often, the strongest essays can be the ones that are able to find a perfect blend of the scene of childhood with a reflection of present day. So, a great example of this is an essay written by the Delhi based academic Paromita Patranobish last year. Paromita wrote about a time over 2 decades ago from the 90s when she was a 13-year-old and she spent a night stargazing on the rooftop of her family home in Durgapur in West Bengal. She had a mesmerizing experience watching a meteor shower, and she had these minute descriptions of this event. that really added color to her essay. But what made her piece truly special was that when she wrote this essay 20 years later, she added reflections and retrospections from her perspective as an adult. So this essay had two I characters: the 13-year-old Paramita who saw the meteor shower, and then the adult Paramita who saw her former self seeing the meteor shower. Now this adult could then include decades of experience to explain to us how that night changed her life, how she understands herself now as a tiny being in the vastness of space and the universe. This is the power that the best kind of essays about memory. The ability to be two people at once, to show who you once were and show how you look back at that, your former self. Sometimes you may dislike your former self. I've written essays about school days when, I took part in bullying and teasing my own classmates. But you have to expose that self of yours, warts and all, no matter how imperfect it may be. Sometimes your younger self may teach you bigger things. Of course, there's no bigger influence on one's childhood memories than that of one's parents. These memories are so formative to the personality of every person, and often thinking about them as a writer in retrospect will make you re-examine these relationships. It could be a moment when your parents embarrassed you by maybe revealing a closely guarded secret in the face of their friends, or it could be a moment when your parents went the extra mile for you, even if they were thousands of miles away from you in boarding school. How did your I character react to the past in these moments? And how does the present day I character now think about the past? As a writer, your pen or your keyboard are your tools of excavation, and you have to dig that tool deep within yourself and find the memory that speaks strongest and most vividly to you, even if that memory makes you uncomfortable. The same has to be done if you're repackaging the memory as fiction. Good or bad, you have to tackle it. You have to find the specifics. You have to make it live and shine bright. No great prose is written without just a tiny amount of unpleasantness. You know what's the most wonderful part about this excavation into one's own past? It's the fact that writing about memory can serve as a form of therapy. So whether it's trauma or some form of unfulfilled expectation, a relationship that was left without coming full circle, or an event that you haven't really fully digested or come to terms with yet, writers can have this sort of superpower, I feel, of detaching from their own self and of studying themselves from a distance, while also having access to one's own nostalgia and one's own memories and experiences. Whether or not you eventually create great prose from your memory is almost irrelevant in the end. I feel that what you'll end up doing is getting a better understanding of the memory itself, and then hopefully a better understanding of self. I want to thank Woodstock School for giving me a chance to share my thoughts with you in this TEDx talk. I hope it has been helpful, and I hope that excavating your memories of Woodstock or boarding school days or any memory of childhood, I hope it helps to urge a creative spring, whether you're a writer, an artist, a musician, or just someone hoping to reconnect with your younger self. Thank you very much.